into it. Seafarers, Fishers, and Marine Pollution. The bio in the book says that I was nominated by the United States Coast Guard to be an IMO Maritime Ambassador. I'm very pleased to have said that the IMO said yes to that. So as of January, I am an IMO Maritime Ambassador, and part of that is to educate about the commercial maritime industry. So every presentation I make includes a few key elements. Some of this will be revisionist for you. This is just a review. So don't mind me, but I just feel passionately that the more we're all saying the same things in terms of recognizing the value proposition of the industry, the more we can communicate with the public and let them know that this is a valuable industry and it needs to be supported. The mariners involved in it need to be supported, and you port centers and port chaplains need to be supported. So as you all probably know, there are over 50,000 commercial vessels trading internationally, transporting all kinds of cargo. There are over 170 flag state nations and over 1 million seafarers to whom you minister. Shipping's role in global trade: the commercial shipping industry transports more than 90% of the world's goods and energy. And that figure has more than doubled between 2008 and 2014. More than doubled. So more ships, more seafarers. That means your job's gotten, in many respects, the pool has gotten bigger. But as we talked about earlier, a lot of the changes in regulations and technology mean you're not seeing quite as many seafarers. Shipping, as we all know, is regulated by the IMO based in London, and they're a UN agency responsible for the safety of life at sea and protection of the marine environment. Regulations are one thing, but the enforcement mechanism is another. It is the flag state's responsibility to enforce these measures. And flag states enforce them through the utilization of inspections on ships, conducted primarily by what Clay referred to earlier, responsible organizations such as classification societies. And a further layer of enforcement comes with port state control. Thank you, Commander. In our case, it's the United States Coast Guard. Now, merchant vessels versus fishing vessels. This is where I learned an awful lot when it comes to the fishing community. I mentioned earlier there are over 50,000 merchant vessels trading in the world. But in 2012, it was estimated, the estimated number of fishing vessels was approximately 4.72 million fishing vessels, 3.2 of which were operating in marine waters. And 64,000 of that 3.2 million are 24 meters or greater in length. So 64,000 versus 50,000 merchant vessels. The fishing fleet outnumbers commercial shipping. But why don't we know the actual number of the fishing vessels? It's because, for reasons which I can't even explain, that I don't know, fishing vessels up until 2013 were exempt from having AIS identification, and even today it's only voluntary. And SOLAS requirements of numbering for cargo ships do not apply to vessels, fishing vessels, even over 300 gross tons. And how can IMO numbers be changed even if they had them? Simple paint job will do it. So if we don't know how many fishing vessels there are in the world, and which vessels are where and what they're engaged in, how are we supposed to know what's going on board them? How are we supposed to regulate them if we could? How are we supposed to know exactly what's going on? IMO and marine pollution. As I've said many times to this group, shipping is statistically the least environmentally damaging mode of all transport. You've seen my graph. Shipping is environmentally benign and is the most environmentally efficient mode of transportation. 21 of the IMO's 51 international instruments are directly environmentally related. And the IMO's Marine Environment Protection Committee is the technical body that looks into these matters. Some of those environmental instruments include MARPOL, Marine Pollution, OPRC, Convention, Oil Pollution Preparedness, Response, and Cooperation. The AFS controls anti-fouling systems on ship, ballast water management, let's not go there, Hong Kong Convention on Recycling of Ships, and the London Convention Protocol on Regulating Dumping. But only two IMO treaty instruments pertain directly to fishing vessels. One is the Cape Town Agreement on Fishing Vessel Safety, which originally was called the Tornenos Protocol of 1977, has yet to enter force. And we thought Ballast Water Management Convention was tough. And then there's the 1995 STCW Fishing Convention, which entered into force in 2012, and you referenced that earlier. Industry safety, not such a great track record. There's an estimated 24,000 human casualties in the fishing industry annually. Even in the US, the fatality rate of commercial fishing industry is 39 times higher than the national average for other industries. We also have to look at the catch itself. The state of fish stocks. Fish stocks account for 17% of humanly consumed protein. Yet 85% of all commercial fish stocks are now fished up to their biological limits or beyond. And when you dig down into that 85%, 31.4% of those fish stocks are overfished. Record catches, to give you an example of tuna, record catches of tuna were seen in 2014, but of the 7 principal tuna species, 41% of the stocks were estimated to be overfished. And the Pacific bluefish tuna has been fished down to 97%, which means they've got just 2.6% remaining of that species alone. It's estimated that up to 100 million sharks are caught each year and killed, just for their fins, by the way. And some shark populations have declined by 98%, or just in the last 15 years. Fishing and marine debris. There is something called fish aggregating devices. There are a couple of examples here. And typically they're made of non-biodegradable synthetic materials. At a conservative estimate, 90,000 of these fish aggregating devices are deployed annually. And of that 90,000, 10% are lost. Failure to retrieve these aggregating devices can result in devastating ecological impacts, such as entangling marine mammals and wildlife and washing up on beaches. And we've heard about the gyres, the Pacific gyres. They form a huge part of that. There are fisheries observers that do go out on vessels, and many fleets are required to carry observers. Based on observer data in the Western and Central Pacific regions, the pollution from fishing vessels is a significant problem for that region. There is also something called illegal, unregulated, and unreported fishing. IUU. Those are all activities that happen outside the control of whatever laws and regulations there are in terms of catch, including fishing without a license, fishing in a closed area, fishing with prohibited gear, fishing in excess of a quota, and fishing of prohibited species. And it's estimated that the value of IUU catch is anywhere between $10 and $23 billion annually. 1 out of every 5 marine caught fish is thought to be caught by IUU fishing. In other words, 20% of the catch is illegal. And it's estimated that between 10 and 32% of all wild caught seafood here in the US was caught illegally. Now let's get down to where the rubber meets the road. Illegal fishing and human rights violations. This unsustainable practice, IUU fishing, is often connected to egregious human rights abuses such as human trafficking and forced labor. While the social and environmental aspects may seem disparate, they are linked. In one report, 59% of the victims trafficked onto Thai long-haul fishing vessels reported seeing the captain murder a seafarer. And in 2015, an AP, Associated Press, investigation on slave labor in the fishing industry was published and traced this related fish products to market in both the United States and Europe. So slave labor on fishing vessels traced those products to the US and Europe. Because of the investigation, more than 2,000 enslaved fishermen were rescued in 2015. So what are some of the weak points when we look into the fishing industry? A lack of transparency of vessel owners and the history of vessels. IMO numbers are not standard mandated on fishing vessels. Lack of at-sea surveillance systems. Vessels aren't required to carry AIS unless they're over 300 gross tons and on an international voyage. AIS can be easily deactivated. We've never seen that, right? Never? Vessels are also staying out longer because they have to go further to find the fish. If fish stocks are depleted, they have to go further to find them. And sometimes they do not enter into port for years because they use a mothership. So they discharge their catch onto a mothership. So seafarers, fishermen, can go for years without seeing port. Here are some examples, some extreme examples of what it's like to be working in the fishing industry. You can see that the Fijian fisherman being shot video. And here is mysterious disappearance exposes the dark side of the fishing industry. And unfortunately, this is on a US fishing vessel. Mutiny on the Majestic Blue. Fishermen have been known to dump, when we get into Marpole now, fishermen have been known to dump entire fuel tanks overboard in order to make room for fish products in clear violation of Marpole 1. In one US court filing regarding wrongful death on the fishing vessel, the Majestic Blue, the factual background states, furthermore, the other officers and crew members routinely and deliberately ignored the orders of Captain Hill and violated international pollution treaties. And while captain at a different time on the same vessel alleged that the crew of the US vessel completely disregarded Marpole regulations. Fishing vessels generally operate outside of commercial shipping lanes, where enforcement is rare. Fisheries observers, and based on observer reports, the Western and Central Pacific Fisheries Commission found more than 10,000 reports of marine pollution incidents from purse seine vessels alone between 2003 and 2015. 71% were waste dumped overboard. Plastics, 37%, metals, 15%, waste oil, 9%, general garbage, 8%, and chemicals, 2%. Oil spillage and leakage, 16%, and abandonment, lost, or dumped fishing gear, 13%. Among the recommendations made to combat marine pollution from these fishing vessels were increasing the number of observers. However, observers aren't necessarily welcome on board vessels. How can we make changes? Widespread ratification of the Food and Agricultural Organization's agreement on port state measures to prevent, deter, and eliminate illegal, unregulated, and unreported fishing. It did enter into force just this past June, and many critical countries need to ratify. We don't have to go where the U.S. is on its ratification. But it sets standards for inspecting foreign fishing vessels and allows for vessels suspected of illegal fishing to be denied entry into ports. So if you're going to be denied entry into your market, there's incentive for complying with international regulations. Another area is the ratification and entry into force of the ILO's Work in Fishing Convention, which aims to ensure fishermen have decent working conditions on board vessels. It's not yet in force. Currently, only 8 countries have ratified it, and they need 10. And also supporting the Food and Agricultural Organization's global record of fishing vessels, the global record of fishing. Recently, voluntary FAO efforts to improve transparency and traceability to fisheries sector by creating a comprehensive record of fishing vessels. This gets back to the AIS and IMO numbers. Additional changes, again, IMO numbers, and supporting pioneering technology to track AIS, as well as looking at video monitoring systems that can track ships. At sea, surveillance is incredibly expensive, and some nations cannot afford that outside of their EEZs. Ratification and entry into force of the Cape Town Agreement on fishing vessel safety. This is the SOLAS for fishing vessels. And also further ratification of the STCW for fishing. Increasing traceability of fishery products themselves. In other words, from bait to plate, know where your seafood is coming from. I was asked by Jason to give you a little bit of an update and an overview on NAMEPA, and I know many of you are familiar with what we do. But I just wanted to go quickly, since I'm still 4 minutes short of my timeline. NAMEPA is one of the many agents for change. You know that our mission is to preserve and protect the marine environment and demonstrate maritime's commitment to the environmental protection. We engage maritime industry and regulators and environmental groups and educators to save our seas. We also educate seafarers, port communities, and students about marine environment protection, and we educate the public about the value proposition about the maritime industry. Our members come from primarily Canada, the United States, Mexico, and the Caribbean, but we do have members from Europe who trade to the United States. We host events. We have 3 primary events, and then in Houston, Washington, and New York. And then we have regional events. We were supposed to have one in Vancouver, and unfortunately it just got canceled. But we also have done events down in Florida, as well as in New Orleans. We have education initiatives, and NAMMA has been very helpful in that. Out on the desk, I think I've now moved it from the money guys, to the NAMMA table. I've got some educational materials that NAMMA has been instrumental in distributing to seafarers. We produced the MARPOL training handbook, which NAMMA members distributed to seafarers on board ships. We now have a one-sheet flyer on that MARPOL convention. We've got information on the plastics problem, what's happening with plastics in our seas, as well as our marine debris flyer, which describes the decomposition of plastic, of glass, of fishing line, etc. And those are all available on the NAMMA table. But through our relationship with NAMMA, you distributed also over 12,000 copies of the American Club's environmental crimes poster. Basically, if you dump oil overboard, you will go to jail. And these are educational initiatives so that the mariner gets yet one more opportunity to learn not just the what of MARPOLs, but the why, the impact on the environment. We also work with port communities, distributing our marine debris poster. Over 200,000 copies have been distributed, and it's been distributed throughout our hemisphere. And we also work with students. We have an annual student drawing contest on the IMO theme, Maritime Year theme. If anybody, please, we would love to get more entries. If you have relationships with schools, if you would like to have a relationship with your local schools just to begin community awareness, we have got K-12 educational products on the marine debris, the marine environment, and we're about to do the marine industry itself. And we have a host of partnerships and strategic alliances with the Coast Guard, with NAMMA, with NOAA, with the IMO, etc. So, advocate, educate, activate. We're all in this together. Thank you very much.